Just get going quickly. Yeah, I think we're live. Awesome. Thank you so much, Rand. Good afternoon to all of the folks in the Western Hemisphere, and I think we have a lot of audience joining in from India, Southeast Asia as well. So it's like the late midnight burning oil for them. But
Oh
thank you
gosh.
everyone for joining in. I think Rand, you're obviously very famous in almost all content and SEO circles. And I think we've got by far the best response in terms of when we announced that you're joining us. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. No, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I'm genuinely stoked for today's session. Folks, we've got Ryan Fishkin with us now. Now, I'm sure most of you already know him, but for those who don't, well, he's the genius who co founded Moz. Yep, that Moz, the go to place for all things SEO. And just when we thought he'd take a breather, he surprised us again by co founding Sparktoro, a free to try market research and audience intelligence tool. And besides his ventures, Rand is a prolific author. If you get a chance, grab his book Lost and Founder. It's a candid sneak peek into his life in the SaaS world. So hey Rand, it's awesome to have you with us here today.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, good to be here.
Awesome. So I think as we transition into this discussion, let's set some stage. We're diving into the SaaS space. SaaS industry is seen like this seismic shift over the last few years. It's huge, right? It feels like there's a new SaaS company popping up every other minute. I'm always on product hunt looking at new businesses being formed. But here's the catch. How do you stand out? How do you make people go, oh yeah, I trust them? With barriers to entry reducing and competition intensifying, standing out in this crowded marketplace is more challenging than ever. It's not just about a snazzy logo or a cool slogan anymore. It's about making connections, telling stories, being the go to authority in your niche. And today, with Rand's insights, we're going to explore how you can make your mark in the SaaS world with some epic brand authority. So let's get started. Rand, questions for you. What do you think are foundational elements needed to build brand authority in the SaaS industry?
Yeah, it's a tough one, but I would start with one of two things. I think that there are a number of companies and opportunities who start from a product-centric standpoint. So they essentially say, "Hey, this particular market is underserved or not well served, or we have something particularly innovative, special, unique that we can offer to this market from a product perspective." And I think those companies should lean into their strength, which is kind of a product-led growth, and the product being the authority rather than the brand. And what I mean by that is I don't think every SaaS business should be a content creator, a social media influencer. I think that many of those folks who are in SaaS, who are product led and product first, can focus on what they do best, which is product, and leave the influencing to other people, other publications, and simply leverage connections between them, right? We have a great product. How do we get that featured, amplified, talked about? How do we do something where we partner with a brand or a publication or an influencer in the space? And I think that can work great. The other way is a little bit more what I did with Moz and Sparktoro, and that is to be the source of influence yourself, right? To build up a big email list, to build up a lot of subscriptions to your content, to do video, to do webinars, to do live events, to do blog posts and articles and all that kind of stuff. And that can work well also. I think this is true for all of marketing. I think that most folks should do one or two things really well, and especially early on, just concentrate on those one or two things rather than trying to be everything to everyone.
Makes sense. And Rand, personally, which brands would you say have done this really well that you really love?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the brands that I think did a great job sort of early on with product was Wistia. And then they later, as they matured, they also did some content and thought leadership and events and, produced their own videos to show those things off. But they started with a strong product in an underserved space and have continued to lean into that product. Another good one, I mean, this is a really big company, but it's Canva, right? So Canva's done a phenomenal job sort of at scale from a product-led, product-centric standpoint. They had a very strong product. It served lots of people. They weren't necessarily a source of influence for tons of designers. They did produce some content, but a lot of that content was about how to use Canva specifically, not, hey, here we're a broad authority on all things, whatever, design and UI and those kinds of things. But Canva got featured in all of those places where UI and UX and visuals and sort of art for the corporate world, design for the corporate world was talked about. So I think those two brands, both an indie company and a big, I think Canva's hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue now, right? And venture backed and all that kind of stuff. In terms of content led brands, on the big side, right, I might look at somebody like a HubSpot, which started out being both a product, but also very much a content authority. They invested very heavily in content, right, and built that up. And then on the indie side, right, there's dozens. I mean, certainly Moz and Sparktoro would fit that bill. So would a lot of other folks. I'm trying to think of a great one in the marketing space. Yeah, I mean, I think those are reasonable examples.
Makes sense. No, I think, Rand, this is amazing to understand. And yeah, I think like at least at Pepper also, we're big believers that every company is a content company. And well, I completely get your point. Not everyone needs to think like that. But I think fundamentally people who've thought about building these editorial desks for themselves, trying to find out that niche voice in the market, their sense of purpose, I think they've exceedingly done well. So no, completely resonate with what you're saying. uh, Also very curious that often, a lot of categories are now getting saturated, like
Yeah.
for example the CRM space, martech. Whenever I look at that map of martech, it just gets high BP. So just curious, what do you think, how does someone talk about that finding that voice in that saturated market?
I mean, my biggest advice is when you design your business and product, you should find a sector that is not well served rather than chasing, the same space that everybody else is in. I think that's where you get into trouble.
Hmm.
My fear is that you look at a crowded map, and you say, well, I'm better than every other entrepreneur, founder, company in that space. And so I'm going to enter that space because it's a big market, right? It's
Hmm.
a multi-billion-dollar market or something. And I think that frankly, that's a really dumb way to think about it. Or at least it's not dumb. It's just low odds, right?
Hmm.
And I don't like low odds businesses. I like hot model. I think it's terrible, especially as an entrepreneur, right? You can't invest in 100 companies. You can't start 100 companies in your lifetime even. So you got to pick really carefully which one. Same as an employee, right? Like you're probably not going to join 100 companies in your lifetime, even if you're working 50 years. Hopefully it's much less than that. So my argument would be that you should instead choose sectors and spaces that are underserved. So maybe you say, gosh, we think that people who do home contracting don't have great software to manage their subcontractors. Great. Okay. That's a niche. I don't know how big it is exactly. You could probably do some market research and figure that out. But now you might be marketing software or CRM or whatever, and you're on this crowded map. But in fact, in your little space, in the people who serve the same group that you serve, you're one of maybe only 2 or 3 good choices, right? And
Yeah,
the other 2 or 3 might be very broad. They're for everybody, but you're specifically for that one group. I think that positioning is a superpower, especially in any type of space that's crowded.
makes sense. No, the more time you're in the Bay Area, at least, seen one positioning starting to work a lot with VCs, which is AI enabled something. I think it's just mad
I mean,
seeing.
it's so funny because 3 years ago, right, it was NFTs plus everything, right? And right before that, it was blockchain plus everything. And before that, it
Yeah,
was machine learning plus everything. And before that, it was mobile app plus everything. And in
yeah,
every one of these cases, there were a few companies that made a lot of money and thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands that didn't, right? That all failed. And venture is fine with that, right? The venture community, the Silicon Valley sort of mindset is, out of 100,000 companies in this space, 5 are going to be successful. And you're either one of those 5, or, you're kind of a nobody who has no success. And they're okay with that. And I don't, that mindset and mentality doesn't resonate with me. I don't like it at all. I think that entrepreneurs should aim for better odds. And I think that means keeping yourself out of the venture mindset, and generally the community too, because it will bias you to think that unless you're, growing at 100% year over year or greater, and on track to be $100 million in revenue, and you have raised from like the, particular funds, that you're terrible, right? That you're just a lifestyle business. And they use that as a pejorative to try and prevent people from chasing more modest, more realistic dreams. And I hate that. I think that's, I think they, obviously they need every entrepreneur to be going after their style of capitalism, but we don't need to participate in that. And we can have better, more successful businesses and more successful lives and happier customers and happier employees and teams if we don't.
makes sense. And Ryan, a lot of us here are curious to understand. I think, something like Moz took, I think 15 years of your time to build out to where it is today. And then now you're doing this with Sparktoro as well. Just very curious, how did you think about brand building from day one? Was it more like an awakening in the middle when you were trying to figure out? Because I don't think, from what I know, you guys raised a lot of venture money. I think a lot of it was you guys starting out scaling yourself, and then word of mouth was a big factor for you guys. So how did you build that brand authority both for Moz and now for Sparktoro? What was your playbook like?
Yeah. So let's see. Moz, in its early days was very content led, right? So by producing content in a space that was generally untrusted, right? SEO was sort of viewed as this, black box, and also very
Yeah,
seen as very sketchy and scammy and spammy. And because of that, very few serious players tried to enter that market, right? Very few entrepreneurs went into it. There was no, I think we were the very first company to ever raise venture funding in the SEO software space. Obviously, like SEMrush did later on, and arguably a few others. I think a few European companies did as well. But Moz was the first one to do that. But even before we raised venture, we had a brand that was associated with, I think, expertise and sort of trust in the space, in that really helped people adopt the software even before SEO software was a popular thing, or SEO practices were a popular thing.
yeah,
In terms of Sparktoro, we didn't raise any venture, unsurprisingly, right? Given my thoughts around that. But Sparktoro has also been a content-led brand. What's interesting is the distribution channels are very different. So whereas Moz essentially produced content to rank well in search engines, do SEO itself and get lots of people paying attention that way, Sparktoro gets almost no search traffic at all. The only search traffic we get literally is just for our brand name. We don't rank for anything. I think we get less than 500 visits a month from all sources, all keywords combined that aren't Sparktoro. Maybe even less than that. And that is kind of by intention, right? Our belief is that there are not people searching for the product that we make or the problem that we solve, at least not yet. And so there's not a lot to rank for, right? There's no long list of keywords where if we ranked for these things, we would turn those people into customers. And those channels that we do invest in, which are very much social, webinars, live streams, content, but content that is found and subscribed to through other channels, not found through search. All of those are where we believe we can be uniquely valuable to people and build up a lot of trust and authority. And frankly, we don't have to compete with a lot of people, right? Not a ton of brands doing what we're doing, which is interesting. When I was in SEO, especially my first 10 years in SEO, I was trying to convince everyone, like, please do SEO. Oh my God, why won't you do any SEO? And now, right now, it's like, okay, everybody's done SEO. They all listened. Not necessarily to me, obviously, right? But so now that marketplace is very saturated, that space is very saturated. And so we pursue spaces that are less saturated, where there's more open field.
That's, I think, a very interesting way to look at it. And, I think especially given you've seen the entire journey 180 degree, and now deciding to take, the road not taken. I think it's very interesting to learn and understand that. And, just very curious, you've built out a great brand on LinkedIn, and there's this thought process about owned media,
Yeah.
right? So how do, say, for example, SaaS founders or executives in marketing think about positioning themselves as thought leaders to establish their brand identity? And what would you say people do? Like, for example, today, even X, or formerly Twitter, is promoting, advocating people to use their platform as a media platform for own media, then make it easy for them to, like, export their subscriber list to different platforms. uh, like, for example, just hypothetically, tomorrow LinkedIn stops working for either one of us, our following, which is built over time, is just lost. So how do you, what's your take? Two questions. One, how does one think about thought leadership to establish themselves as a category leader or a key player in their ecosystem? And second, should it be on owned media, or platforms which are, available to larger audiences?
Let's see. So the second question is a simpler one to answer. So I'll tackle that first.
Hmm.
I would say that if you are building content, whether your content is entertainment centric or commerce centric or product centric or thought leadership, I think about it this way, which is essentially all of the promotion of that content that I do across social platforms or other people's media or other own channels is designed to drive people back to your owned channel. And this is because you cannot rely on any platform. LinkedIn is probably the most reliable platform out there, to be honest, right? Twitter is probably the least reliable platform, right? I mean, 2 years ago, I used to get a tremendous amount of activity and attention, awareness from Twitter 5 years ago, even 10 years ago. And then obviously Elon bought it and it's kind of gone to shit. And you can't, you cannot rely on, especially like a privately owned platform, right? Twitter is very much at this point just whatever weird thing Elon wants it to be. If he wants it to be just a place where he posts and everybody sees his posts, or he wants it to be sort of a right-wing conservative platform, right, political platform, which is sort of turning into a lot of the different communities. So Sparktoro, obviously monitored tremendous amounts of data from Twitter. And Twitter used to be a place where a lot of niche communities participated, followed each other, shared stuff. And now it's become kind of a monoculture around kind of whatever is Elon centric, right? So the certain communities on there are thriving and they're doing well because they're sort of things that align well with who he is, what he likes, etc. And then lots of other community, Black Twitter is basically gone. Like, it doesn't exist anymore. It used to be a massive community, huge part of that platform, and it's essentially gone entirely. So I would say don't put your eggs in any of those baskets, but don't ignore them entirely either, right? If you know that, for example, let's say you are playing in a community like AI. Well, it turns out there is a big AI discussion community on Twitter, and that still exists. But maybe that exists for a long time, or maybe it goes away in 6 months or a year. But while it exists, you might as well leverage it. And so when you're producing and creating content, I would host that on your platform, your email list, your website. Those are kind of the only two. But I would share it on Twitter. I would build connections through Twitter and get other people who have influential followings on Twitter to share it. And I would probably put the bulk of my activity in terms of sharing and audience building on a platform that I trusted more. LinkedIn being a great one in the B2B sector, Instagram being fairly reliable, and now Threads, right? Like, Meta is not going to destroy those platforms. And as much as I disagree and dislike a lot of the things that Mark Zuckerberg does, I think he's a much more reliable person, right? His personal wealth is sort of tied to, and success is tied to, Facebook and Instagram, whereas Twitter's sort of a side project for Elon. And I would, feel relatively comfortable building up a following on Instagram, especially Threads, Facebook, and sort of leveraging those as places where people could find my content, or at least a snippet of that content, and then come to my site for the full experience. In SaaS, the best way to do this, definitely, and this goes a little bit to your first question, the best way to do this, I think, is to tie together product and content. So this is true whether it's thought leadership or not. But essentially, when I do whatever thought leadership content of any kind, my hope is that and my goal is that it ties back to the problem Sparktoro solves, right? So it's not just thought leadership for the sake of thought leadership. I'm not talking about, employee advocacy or, sort of search marketing, right? Which Sparktoro doesn't really help with. I instead talk about audience research, content and community building, finding sources of influence, understanding your audience and your customers so that you can serve them better, market to them better, message to them better, all those kinds of things. And that ties to what Sparktoro does. And the idea then is people come to Sparktoro's site and it's free to sign up and use the tool, right? There's no free trial. It's not like Moz. Moz did the free trial for 30 days, which I think worked reasonably well for that business. But Sparktoro, our goal is build that big, broad email list. And so the product's completely free forever. And then there's a freemium version, right? You can pay for higher. But the great part about it is people come to Sparktoro after hearing me talk or seeing me at an event or reading our content or seeing something from Amanda. And then they get on our email list because they try the product, right, and sign up. Great, right? Now we have, 150,000 plus people who've tried Sparktoro and used the free version. And that's sort of our owned audience. So I really like that combination of use your content in a teaser format on social and other people's channels, bring them to your own channels, and then if you can, connect up your product in your own channel.
I think that's a wonderful strategy. So it's essentially using the powers of all the platform that you're seeing work out in your favor. And I think then it's also kind of going back the repurposing route that a lot of people also ended up using to amplify it to selective audiences for selective messaging and formats. So no, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think honestly, more people I meet, even though email response rates tell a different story, but I think it still continues to be a reliable, trusted source of where your audience wants to hear you.
Yeah,
So I
yeah. I
think,
mean, the click-through rate, if you look at your impressions on LinkedIn or impressions
yes.
on Twitter, and you see what is the click-through rate from, a link that I shared.
Hmm.
Twitter is an especially egregious example. I think Rival IQ does an annual report on this, and on Twitter it's 0.008, so less than 1/1000th of 1% of people who might see your content on Twitter will click through, right? Will actually come visit your website. Facebook, it's pretty bad. It's like 0.002, or sorry, 0.02. So, whatever, several times better than Twitter, but still quite low. LinkedIn is a little bit better than that, but
Yeah,
still, way under 0.1%.
makes sense.
Email, your email click through, right? Email like open rates and click through rates have been in the 22% range since MailChimp started monitoring it 15 years ago. And you can go to MailChimp's like average, open rate, average click through rate, whatever. I think open rate is like 25%, 24%, something like that. And click through rate is in the 5 or 6%. So we're talking thousands of times better than, social media non-owned channels. And this is why the whole goal is bring someone from social or any other channel to your site, get them to subscribe. Then you have a real audience.
Makes sense. And Dan, what's your thought on extending this to community? I'm seeing a lot of influencers are now building out communities, or some newsletters that started out are now building communities out there. Very niche, purpose focused, that also help them build out their brand. What's your thought and thesis on that?
I think some of it is great and a lot of it is griftery. um, what I mean by that is there are a lot of people who might have some expertise or some knowledge to share with you,
Mhm.
but the communities that they're building are mostly for monetization, right? They're basically like, hey, I think if I can just get 1,000 people to pay me $25 a month to, whatever, share thoughts with each other, then I won't have to create content for them. Okay, I mean, in a few places, there's probably some clever people who will make that work, and some of those communities will be really valuable. And I think it's a wonderful thing to share, not just thoughts and opinion, but also try and help one another in a professional space. I think that makes for really enjoyable professional experiences. So I don't have a fundamental problem with it. I do worry that a lot of those are cash grabs and not particularly valuable. And so I would urge folks to generally be skeptical about signing up for them and make sure that they're really providing value and have good policies and those kinds of things. But in terms of building a community versus building an audience, it's much, much harder. Getting people to participate versus just consume is 100 times more difficult. And I think for most brands, there's also a lot of challenge and risk. Moz obviously tried to build a big community through our Q&A and our message boards and our blog comments and, all these kinds of places. We had like a big back end to handle that. And, there was literally community liaisons who worked on a team that were tasked with sort of a combination of managing and growing those communities. I think in retrospect, I probably would not have made that investment. I
Hmm.
think it was a big, big cost sink, big distraction, felt like a huge deal to us all the time. But I would argue probably not the best thing for a VC-backed SaaS business that's focused on essentially trying to grow revenue. So my contention would be, for 99% of B2B SaaS, it's not the right thing to do. For most retail e-commerce businesses, also not the right thing to do. I think there's a few niche places where it makes sense, like maybe Redfin in the real estate space. It makes sense for them to have a community center for real estate agents, right? But few and far between.
I think that's very interesting, Ryan. Thanks for giving that perspective. I think definitely makes a lot of sense. And just very curious, and just some self reflection. What are some mistakes you made with Moz, but you were able to overcome while building Sparktoro? Like, what are those, second time entrepreneur instincts that you could share with the audience today?
Yeah, I would say the biggest two are, one is the design of the business. So essentially, what we set out to accomplish and how. So Sparktoro made what I think is a much more reasonable, high likelihood of accomplishing its goals type of business, right? We set out to be profitable, to be able to pay our investors back, and then to exist for a long time and serve our market, which is challenging, right? Like, a lot of businesses don't succeed in doing that, startups don't, but the odds are more like 1 in 5, right? So not terrible. Versus Moz, which was essentially become $1 billion unicorn or die trying. And it didn't get there, right? Like, Moz essentially petered out in terms of growth at around $50 million in revenue. At least that's where it was when I left in 2018. I'm not sure where it is today, but I suspect considerably lower. And that's tough, right? Like, it was a constant slog and heartache to be trying to do that and struggling to do it. I think the other big things that I realized is that I don't like running big teams. And I don't think, as an entrepreneur, like, the whole point of being an entrepreneur is not to maximize your financial gain. I would make way more as like a mid-level manager at Microsoft, right, than I ever did in the startup world. And the same is true for anybody else who starts a company, right? The real thing is you get to control your participation in the labor world. Like, you get to decide, I want to do things this way, not that way. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs forget that at some point, and they think they're supposed to do something. So they do a lot of things that they hate, with the idea that, well, this is just how it goes. This is just what I have to do to make it. And there's a little bit of that stuff, but you can design a business to make it very, very small. And that's what I did with Sparktoro. So, the team size is 3. It's just me, Casey, and Amanda. That's it. No other people work at Sparktoro. I should say Amanda's out on parental leave as we're recording this. So we actually have help from a wonderful marketing consultant named Brendan Huffer, who's filling in for Amanda, and he's sort of like part-time with Sparktoro right now. But 3 people, right? That's it. That's our whole team. I don't think we will ever get to be more than 10, like, in our whole life as a company. And that's just because neither Casey or I like building big companies, big from an employee standpoint. Another design one is that we designed the business to be very low maintenance. So we don't have a sales team. As a result, we decided we didn't want to get good at sales. And so we designed the pricing of the product, the way you try the product, the way we educate you about the product, the way the product works, to all be very self-serve. Like, anybody can figure out Sparktoro. You type in a search, right? And there's a few drop downs, and then you get the results, and you can click some things and make a list from the results. That's the whole product. That's it. That's all we do. We provide research, right, on what's happening on the internet. And so, because it's incredibly straightforward, we don't need a ton of tutorials. We don't need a lot of education. We barely get any support inquiries, right? We make all the billing and administrative stuff and inviting people to your account and all that stuff like really, really simple. There's not a ton of features, so you don't sort of get lost in the product and get confused and, oh my God, I feel like I'm not getting what I'm supposed to out of this. I think we get less than 5 support inquiries a day on average, which is great for 150,000 people using a product. That's like a very, very tiny number of people writing to us and having any kind of struggle. And most of those are the same ones over again, which is like, you don't support, Germany yet. Nope, we don't. Sorry, that kind of thing. So I think it's a lot of design stuff from the business. And then also there's a good amount of, when you build a company the first time, you try a lot of things thinking this might work, let's do it. And after you try those things, you learn, oh, that thing doesn't work as well as I hoped it would, so I'm not going to do it. A good example is Moz built an enterprise sales team and division and tried to build a product for enterprise. Not successful for that company, and eventually was shut down. I think it was shut down like maybe a year or two after I left. But I had argued against it from day one, but now I'm even more inspired to never do enterprise. That's not to say other people might not be good at enterprise. You might be great at it, in which case, should you offer a self-service product? Should you be freemium? Maybe you shouldn't. Do the thing you're good at. Do the thing you love doing. Design your business to optimize for the things that you enjoy, the things that you're great at, the things where you know what you're doing, as opposed to, well, I think I probably should do both X and Y and Z, all 3 of these sort of paths because that's what my competitor does, or that's what I think the market wants. Don't do that. That would be my advice.
No, I think truly spoken from the wisdom of a second-time founder. So I think we'll take it graciously. I think makes complete sense, and I think you gotta be you. I think
I
that's
mean, and my advice,
yes.
the one thing, Arun, is my advice is not for everyone. It's for if you are building a business where you're optimizing to be happy, healthy, build something profitable and small scale successful, right? If you're looking to build something in the SaaS world or the digital marketing universe that's in the $1 to $50 million revenue per year type of size, great. My advice is for you. If you absolutely demand that you need to be a $1 billion company, you probably shouldn't listen to me, right? That I'm not talking about those kinds of businesses. And very frankly, that's also intentional. It's a marketing design intentionality where I say, that's not my world. I don't need to appeal to those people. I'm not trying to appeal to everyone. That's another takeaway that I would tell all founders, all people building businesses, all people running marketing teams. Don't try to appeal to everyone. Turn some people off. Make them angry with you. Make them say, you're wrong. That's bad advice. But it's great advice for another group of people, and that's your audience.
Makes sense.
The only way to build exciting content is to piss some people off. I'm serious. I just don't think you can build. I think you build really boring content, a really boring owned media channel, if you appeal to everybody.
Makes sense. I think that's a very brilliantly unique perspective, and thank you so much for that. I think we're just running on time, so probably just one last question. I think everyone's curious. What's your take on what the future of SEO looks like given AI is there? And most marketers or SEO folks are still not clear on where the roadmap takes them. So, personally, what's your direction to content marketing leaders, CMOs, SEO leaders on how should they be thinking about their roles and the role of SEO and marketing in the next few quarters?
Yeah. Let's see. I think that for 99% of marketers, except for the ones who are sort of writing email newsletters about predicting the future, your job is to go where your audience already is, right? So find where your audience is, go market to them in those places with messages that resonate with them, and then bring them to your own channel. that means you don't have to predict the future. Marketing is one of those funny sectors that's obsessed with what's coming next, right? What's the future going to be? But we don't have to. All we really need to know is, where's my audience right now? And the bulk of my audience. I don't need to know where the super cutting edge 1% super early adopters are, unless that's my entire audience. I really need to know where the bulk of the group of people who might buy from me. And those folks, I would argue that they are not using Google's generative AI results. They are not using ChatGPT or Bard or similar services to find where they're going to buy their next consumer product or their next piece of business software. And so I think you can kind of quietly keep yourself informed, pay attention, sure, but mostly go where your audience is. I don't think the overwhelming majority of SEO is going to be, or any digital marketing channel is going to be massively changed by the adoption of generative AI in the next 6 months, 12 months, maybe even 18 months or 2 years. And if it is, then you should change your behavior. But since it's not, my recommendation would be, do the things that you're good at doing, go where your audience is now. There's only one exception to this, and that is the way generative AI works is it's what we kind of call it spicy autocomplete at Sparktoro, right? It's essentially looking for the next most likely token, word, or group of words that it should put after which other tokens and groups of words. And that's how it like answers your queries and accomplishes tasks. At least something like ChatGPT, right? Image recognition or image based stuff is a little different, video too. But that suggests that you want your brand name to appear next to all the words and phrases that you want your brand associated with on the content that generative AIs will be trained on, which generally means PR, social media content and content marketing, and getting into sources of publications that are influential in your field or outside your field that talk about your field. That is probably a worthwhile investment because it's already paying dividends right now, and it will help you in a generative AI future. So I would argue that's probably a thing that you should be investing some of your time and energy in if you haven't already. You can kind of think of it like the future of link building, right? If like old Google was what links to what, new Google is what words and phrases appear next to which other words and phrases. And so you want words and phrases like your brand name or your personal name or the name of your community or product to appear next to the words you want to be associated with.
Makes sense. Well, and I think that's amazing. I think we've had quite a big of turnout where people have been asking a lot of questions.
Oh, great.
So I think I'll love for my team to just pop up some questions that we've seen from folks. So yeah, this is for you.
Yeah. All right. I love this one. Melis, yeah. So I would say around positioning, you basically want to be, well, okay. My top tip is you should buy April Dunford's book, which is called Obviously Awesome. Help me think about a bunch of positioning stuff. But in terms of SaaS niche market, I would do two things. One, if there are 20 similar players, I would ask the core question, how do we be dissimilar from them? Is that and I would hope that you have answers in at least 3 places. The group that we serve is different from the other 19 players, right? Like, whereas everybody else is going after CMOs at companies of 500 people and more, we're going after the co-founders, VPs of marketing, and marketing directors at companies of only 50 to 200. So we're serving that smaller group, and we're serving them better because we know that they're more budget conscious, and we know that they have a smaller group of people that they need to onboard, but they need to have these particular kinds of controls, and whatever it is, right? So that would be one place I'd play. The other two are, our marketing is different from every other person's marketing in this space, every other similar player, because we do X. X could be anything you imagine, right? It's our brand is whatever, spicier or more aggressive, or our brand is more friendly, or our brand is more personalized, or whatever it is. Those are actually not that differentiated. I would probably try and be even more differentiated. And then the third one is our fundamental product is different. So whereas these other 20 players or 19 players provide or solve the problem this way, we solve the problem a different way. That's what I do if you're trying to develop a unique value proposition in a very crowded niche market.
Makes sense. I think this is super helpful, Rand. I think probably the last question.
Ooh, entertainment elements in educational content. It's a little tough. My general bias is to yes, I like to do that. I like to make content enjoyable to read, which is a little different than entertainment. So a good example is TikTok is an entertainment network, right? I don't think of TikTok as competing with LinkedIn or Facebook or even really Instagram, right? It is not, here's what's going on in your friends' lives, or here's what's going on in your business, professional, hobby, interest world. TikTok is very much here's very short videos that will keep you entertained, kind of like how watching a show on Netflix would keep you entertained. That fundamentally different. And I would argue that most of the time, that's not the kind of entertainment that I would lean into in educational content. But I would say, Alistair, I would very much think about, how do I make my content enjoyable to read? And this is one of the things I think that generative AI cannot do. I have never, not any of the content I have ever seen ChatGPT or Bard or anybody else produce, I have never thought that content is enjoyable to consume. Maybe it's possible to do, but my suspicion is this is something human beings can do that machines cannot yet. And maybe that'll change someday, but I would lean into I can make my writing enjoyable. For example, I wrote about on Sparktoro just recently this analysis that we did. We did a big analysis of ChatGPT user sessions, right? We now analyzed millions of them using Datos's data. And when I write about it, I'm not just like, hey, here's the stats, here's the details, here's what we found, right? What I try and do is make it enjoyable to read, and say things like, if you've been reading breathless takes like this link or that link, you'd be forgiven for assuming that the token prediction tech system has what every VC investor lusts after, J-curve growth. But more discerning observers might have caught that, that's not what's happening. And so it's like, the media is saying this and Rand is telling me that's not what's happening. Okay, that's entertaining. Like I need to read more. It's engaging. It keeps me hooked. That's what I'd argue you should do with educational content.
Makes sense. And I think this is amazing. I think it's pure 50 minutes of amazing learnings we've got to get from you. I think the audience has been there from start to now. So I think it's a pretty engaging, captivating session. Thank you so much for this. Plus, we got a lot of shout outs for your book, especially. A lot of folks have read that already. But for those who haven't, Rand's written this beautiful book called Lost and Founder. So you should check it out and definitely buy that one and ping Rand about your original thoughts on the same. So thank you so much, Rand, for your time. I think really appreciated. All of us at Pepper love you and really appreciate your time with us.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Anirudh.
Thank you, Rand. Thank you.